Good evening. So, today we are going to start with Block 2, and Block 2 talks about recent Canadian poetry. So, today we are going to cover Unit 5 and Unit 6. And in Unit 5, we will study about the growth of Canadian poetry. We will study about the objective, we'll study about the early mid 20th century and the 20th century first half. Then we discuss about the contemporary poetry and its characteristics and the Canadian long poem. Before that ends with Unit 5, we'll discuss about some of the question answers. So, the main objective of understanding to study Unit 5 is it's important to concentrate on the general directions that the Canadian poetry had taken in the last 70 to 80 years at least. So poetry's beginnings in Canada have already been touched upon a little in Block 1, but here we try to understand how did the entire thing is growing, how is the entire thing growing. So let us discuss. Okay, so we start with the poetry of early and mid 20th century. Before we begin, it's so important to understand that the mental acceptance of the things as the way they are, and then when there is an arrival of a new group of poets who just suddenly appeared and who took the responsibility of regrouping the elements of reality, things definitely went into a lot of changes. Now, there is a book called Paradise Essays of Myth, Art, and Reality, and it is written by Louis Duteck. Here, Louis Duteck states that Canadian poetry emerged out of inner necessity and is a proof rather than of a predicament, than a solution of the great questions in this or any other time. So poets like G.D. Roberts, H.M. Smith, and Earl Burney took the responsibility of looking into the meaning of life in the Canadian environment, because to understand what gives you fulfillment, what gives you richness, what gives you a complete satisfaction, to find out the meaning of life is essential. So their poetry revealed this special kind of a cultural anxiety, which becomes a medium to handle the universal issues and cross issues. And gradually, this encouraged other poets also of their generation to foster or move ahead with moving ahead. So, to have a proper understanding of Canadian poetry, it is essentially to important to understand how this study is closely related to nature poetry, and which should not be mistaken for the poetry of natural landscape only. Rather, it should stand for the exploration of landscape, map making, and naming of the country and the rediscovering of history. Consequently, there is a very different concept of the relationship of man and nature, which has been appearing in the Canadian poetry. Although the poets have sometimes understood that beauty and lavishness in nature is absolutely worth expanding the knowledge about it, they also have not hesitated to project their unexplained rejection of moss crowned monsters, where cruelty seems to be the law of nature. It appears that the poets have a split attitude of acceptance and rejection both. Now, in Canada, it's very commonly understood that the only season is winter, and its landscape is either dead or actively hostile to man. Spring is distrusted here, as Alden Nolan stated in his poem April in New Brunswick. Awfully destructive moods of nature dominate the long poems like Pratt, The Titanic, or Bernice David, and Pushed, which present another variety of death by nature. The attitude of the poets towards nature underwent a noticeable change later on, but it is the poets of the early decades of the 20th who made the initial efforts to feel nature as the spiritual substance. Now, we can also talk about Canadian poetry if we really want to understand the mid 20th century, which becomes one of the fundamental approaches, and where we would want to look at the historical and the insightful critical processes which Smith and Brown encouraged. It helps in two ways. It established a canon of Canadian poetry and assessed the achievements of individual poets, and it opened up vistas of endless possibilities of having Canadian criticism with its own tradition and vision of Canadian poetry, which means a poetry appropriate to Canadian experience, to use the words of George Woodwork. If the poetry of early decades, that is of Charles Sangster, E.J. Pratt, Archibald Lampman, Charles D.G. Roberts, D.G. Scott, and Isabella Valenci Crawford, make a very special use of Canadian scene and the world of nature, the poetry of the later decades has added a peculiar quality of imaginism, which is visual and translates the landscape into further words. Now, various tradition of earlier English poetry, like that of T.E. Hulme and English Jacobins, and even Jewish tradition, co-mingled and created extraordinary effects, as in the poetry of Klein. Now, that does not mean that they are homogeneous in group, not the contrary. They were distinctly different voices, interlocked groups who shared the common predicament, a common cause of promoting cultural nationalism through poetry. In an attempt to find their own voices self consciously, they happen to discover their collective national identity through poetry. We move ahead to understand the 20th century's first half, that is from 1900 to 1950. Now, this half is actually where the second half is built upon. So this half is really important because it creates the foundation for the second half. In this half, the romantic and the Victorian heritage dominated the scene. There was a phase of neo-colonial modernism, and there were transitional figures like E.J. Pratt. Then came followers of Anglo-American free versus San Imaginists, and then came the Montreal Group. Then there was an influential magazine called as the First Statement in the 40s, where the poems of urban experiences also came into portrait. Now, contemporary poetry and its characteristics, if we talk about it, we come to know that the Canadian poetry shows an extraordinary continuity throughout the 20th century. If some poets of the early decades had a feeble voice other than like that of A.J.M. Smith and E.J. Pratt, assured the flow of vital current, the unbroken continuity and brilliance of Canadian poetry was definitely sustained by Earl Burney, Dorothy Livesey, and P.K. Page, but produced their best known works in 1960s and 1970s. There is a remarkable poetic upsurge which carried many strands of the modernist movement, including its tendency to be self consciously anti popular, as George Woodworth put it, an extraordinary outburst of poetry which was yielding amazing results. Canadian poetry, being preoccupied with the happenings of the time, its culture and counterculture, showed a deep involvement with the Canadian national identity, which should not be mistaken for the political issues. Liberation from the traditional colonial goals also led to visualizing the realities of Canadian experiences. Now, when the results of these changes made poetry enjoy an unprecedented status in 1980, it attended an international repute because, as Fryer put it, such a quantitative increase eventually makes for a qualitative change. And that actually happened. Now, if poets like A.R. Brody wrote directly from their own experiences, the Marxist-Leninist politics influenced poets like Milton Nakan and Patrick Lane, and Northrop Frye's critical theories promoted the use of mythology, where new myths, as in James Rennie, Jane Philip's Webb and Ellie Mandel's poetry, we should understand that there would be a keen sense of locality, as mentioned by Robert Croetius. All that happened to the land and its people shaped the world view of the poets. Now, some of the poets say that the poem begins and ends nowhere, being part of the flow you live with. Nicole is true surrealist poet of Canada, while Michael Ortadje makes his poetry out of the absurd representation of actuality. As many critics aptly observe, Canadian poets New Love achieve their brilliance being romantic in temperament but diverse in their approaches and style. Canadian poetry tends to believe in William James' notion also that reality keeps changing. It grows out of Canada's pluralistic society, mosaic culture, and enduring domestic values in the face of hostile nature. It adheres to an authentic indigenous system in the face of mobile appearances of multiple realities of here and now. In this famous essay, The Canadian Imagination, David Stoke has succinctly observed that at the center of every imaginative response, buried however deeply, is a vision of human existence. But Canadian imagination is different as it is obsessed with limitations rather than the possibilities of human existence. Canadian poets try to find through poetry different ways of measuring the problems and its related feelings, saving it on one hand intellectualism and on the other from sheer unauthenticity. Canadian poets, being associated with several currently fashionable movements in the society, have become its cultural heroes and cultural leaders. One hand, they are caretakers of collective truth. Sometimes they would resist the oppression of race, gender, and class, and on the other, they are the source of strong intellectual and emotional content. And the 20th century, there is a general shift from mere consciousness of a past to what is valuable in the present. And besides, the contemporary poets attempt to be mythical, as poetry offers them possibilities to be new by making them take an excursion into the world of ideas. There is an attempt to create such poems in which ideas and arrangement of words on the page are meant to show a tendency to present and preserve the essence of the new world in which the physical is endowed with the spiritual substance. Hence, the Canadian poets who are overpowered by fear or unknown of the world are haunted by the loneliness chisel out their experiences into the bone essential statements. There are a curious kind of cultural anxiety exists. Now, later Canadian poetry in general and nature poetry in particular show a change in attitude that is of mutuality, and it also adds three other important characteristics to Canadian nature poetry. The first one, it shows a clear sighter view of man's relationship to nature and animals, leading to an all pervading sense of mythic and historic unity with mankind, to borrow the expression of Woodwork, if I could. There is a haunting sense of love for nation in the best form of nationalistic sentiments. For example, take the poem Miltonaken, where he is carried away by the love for land and states that Canada is the scent of pines. Or the poem which reveals her complete identification with her country, so much so as hardly knows which is your body, which is the land, it's all one. Now, then, the third one, there exists a direct knowledge of life gained through shrewd observations, which makes poets like Alden Norman, Patrick Lane, and Robert Crescent take a vow not to sing another other than our lives. These poets have such a strong sense of locality that they are called the urban regionalist or the localist. Now, if we talk about the Canadian long poems, Canada most distinctive achievement in recent times has been in the domain of the genre known as the contemporary long poem. Here, there are two things. Major critics, that is the view of this genre. In the 1980s, the form most favored the Canadian poets has been the long poem. One can say easily that E.J. Pratt's Towards the Last Spike, that is in 1952, set the trend in modern times. Then there was Dennis Lee's Civil Elegies. In the mid 1960s, the strain was reinforced by the personal narrative poems of Earl Burney, A.L. Prudy, and others. In the former case, Never Falls Greek Mouth is a fine poem. In the sequence just named, the poet begins with a walk along Vancouver's English Bay. Then comes to a meditation on life and death and evolution. The despair come through into the reference to the unreachable nothing, whose winds wash down the human shores and slips showing. El Prudy's most remarkable long poem is The Caribou Horses, which was written in 1965. And in the 1980, the Phyllis Webb's letter to Margaret Atwood is significantly, and so is Daphnis Marlet work in a long poem genre. An extremely remarkable work is George Boring's Carisdale Elegies, that was written in 1984, where the treatment of problematic self keeps both the poems, that is also including the Martyrology by Nichols, both the poems going. Number of critics such as Ellie Mandel, Frank Davey, Robert Croisset, Michael Bernstein, and Joseph Riddle, to mention only a few, have already addressed the difficulty of describing the long poem from a generic point of view. What I have attempted to do here is to show that it is precisely this difficulty, this resistance to generic definition, that characterizes the long poem as a new genre. So, to conclude Unit 5, we can question its legacy of epic lyric and narrative poems. It resides both inside and outside these inherited conditions. It's generic, the complex ways in Milici is nothing other than the sign of its genetics, the complex ways in which it relates to past traditions and to its present circumstances. It is the outcome of what I earlier referred to as in negative dialectics, an unfinished poet's process of binary constructs inside and outside, within and beyond the limits of the genre in both employs and registers. The contemporary long poems offers us a long view of the past it never inhabited and that of the future it will reach. Uh, Important questions to discuss in this unit are: what are the chief characteristics of the 20th century Canadian poetry? And giving a brief account of the major themes of Canadian poetry, and also writing down a short note on Canadian nature poetry. So, here we stop with Unit 5 and we begin with Unit 6 from Block 2. Unit 6 is the recent Commonwealth poetry and Canada's place in it. And here we mostly talk about Derek Walcott. He's a beautiful writer and a Nobel Prize literature winner. And he does a lot of teaching and is quite mobile. So we discuss about Derek Walcott, we discuss about Seamus Haney, we discuss about A.K. Ramanujan and others, and then we conclude. And currently we are in Unit 6. The unit name is Recent Commonwealth Poetry and Canada's Place in it. So why we study this unit? What is objective? We shall understand that it is first of all, it is absolutely essential to achieve to understand what recent Commonwealth poetry has achieved through some sort of its major figures. This will help to put in a slightly better perspective the overall Canadian poetic achievement in recent years. So let's first start with Derek Walcott. And as I was giving the brief introduction, he was born in 1930 and he was a winner of the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1992. A Caribbean poet he was, and from the island of St. Lucia. He does a lot of teaching and is quite mobile. The major influences on him are the American poet Robert Lowell and the Irish poet Seamus Heaney. His works include Dream on Monkey Mountain, O Babylon, Viva, Detroit, in a Green Light poems. There is a collection of poems. The Castaway, The Gulf, Another Life, Omeros, and The Fortunate Traveler. All these poetries had been written between 1967 to 1982, and Walcott actually founded the Trinidad Theatre Workshop in 1959, where many of his own plays, among others, were first performed. His theatre mingles His theatre mingles prose and verse, Creole vocabulary, and calypso rhythms, and it is often preoccupied with national identity, with the choice of home or exile, self realization, or spiritual betrayal of one's country. Walcott poetry is deeply concerned with the conflict between the heritage of European and West Indian culture. Walcott's most formidable poem is Homerus 1990. He imaginatively uses the Homeric narratives as the basis of modernist long poem. Widespread recognition came with In a Green Night poems collection that was written between 1948 to 60. The Castaway, The Gulf, Another Life, which is ionic, antithetical poetry of personal and artistic discovery, detached and skeptical poetry, simultaneously religious in drift and also allowed followed in sea grapes. One major theme of Walcott writing in the dichotomy between black and white, subject and ruler, and the elements of both Caribbean and Western civilization present in his culture and ancestry. One well-known poem, A Far Cry from Africa, from In a Green Night poems, deals directly with Walcott's sense of cultural confusion, like, for example, in the lines, Where shall I turn, divided into vain? I who have cursed the drunken officer of British rule, how choose between this Africa and the English tongue I love? Betray them both or give back what they give. And another poem, The Schooner Flight, from his collection, The Star Apple Kingdom. The poet uses a Trinidadian sailor named Shabine to appraise his own place as a person of mixed blood in a world divided into whites and blacks. According to the mariner, the first chained my hands and apologized history. The next said I wasn't black enough for their pride. Not white enough for whites, not black enough for blacks. Shabanium sums up the complexity of his situation near the beginning of the poem, saying, I had a sound colonial education, I have Dutch, Nigger, and English in me, and either I am nobody or I am a nation. The poems in the Bounty addressed many of the Walcott chief concerns, including the problems of language, colonialism, and history, but a more pronounced fixation of aging, death, and loss emerges as well. Critics have praised Walcott for his mastery of language and poetic technique. Images keep reoccurring, crisscrossing, gaining new associations in verses that have the noble radiance of stained glass, grave but full of light. In another poem, such as The Spoiler's Return, he explores more direct, orthodox Creole forms, but also in a technique used by many other writers, giving standard English a distinctive note by the subtle intrusion of a Caribbean lexicon, syntax, and rhythm. More of his poems included Tomorrow, Tomorrow, which is also interesting. Two of his verse paragraphs read like this: I remember the cities I've never seen exactly, Silver Venik, Leningrad, with its toffee twisted minarets. Paris, soon the Impressionists will be making sunshine out of shade, and the uncoiling cobra alleys of Hyderabad. The world's outside the door, but how upsetting to stand by your bags on a cold step at dawn. Roses the brick wall can before you start regretting your taxis coming with one beep of its horn, sliding to the curb like a hearse, so you get in. This shows the greatest cosmopolitanism of Walcott as compared to many Canadian poets. Ondaatje also has a lot of cosmopolitanism too, but that goes more into novels like The English Patient. Lowell, as stated earlier, was a major influence on Walcott. Lowell's sense of history was congenial to Walcott's own because it had classical, European, colonial, and post colonial all fused in it. Walcott's is a hybrid sensibility, and often his language has a healthy hybridity too. Canadian poetry as a whole has less hybridity in it. Now, there is a wonderful collection called Midsummer, the poem number 26. It's a long poem again, which is remarkable for its dense texture, its complex and contemporaneous imaginary, and for the depth of its versification. Here, Walcott is in the Lowell vein. Such complex clusters of images that form annexes are rare in Canadian poetry. Hine is our next poet that we are going to study. Seamus Heaney won 1995 Nobel Prize for Literature and was born in 1939 in North Ireland. In 1970, he moved to the Republic of Ireland. He has done extensive teaching and has written on another poets. One of his books on prose is The Government of the Tongue. Station Island is a remarkable volume of the poems. And then there are other works which include um, um, 11 poems, Death of Naturalist, Door in the Dark, The Hot Lantern, etc. Heaney's main strength is the imaginative richness and the intellectual depth of his rendering of the Ireland of the 60s through the 90s. He has remarkable depth of feeling about both geographical terrain and human suffering. Parts of Heaney's remarkable poem Bogland Red, we have no prairies to slice a big sun at evening. Everywhere the sun concedes to encroaching horizon. Now this geographical sense of Orland comes through unmistakably in the poem. Another poem from the frontier of writing gives a sense of the civil conflict in Northern Ireland parts of this poem, which read, the tightness and the nilness around that space when the car stops in the road, the troops inspect its make and number, and as one bends his face towards your window, you catch sight of more on a hill beyond eyeing with intent. Down griddle guns that had hold you under cover, past armor plated vehicles out between the posted soldiers flowing and receding like tree shadows into the polished windscreen. The menace that lurks in the Northern Ireland's conflict is strongly present in this poem. It comes through in telling images which also are remarkable for their complexities. Canada in recent times hasn't had any kind of menacing conflict, and that has a correlate in this poetry also. Excuse me. We study about A.K. Ramanujan and others. A.K. Ramanujan is a 1929 born, was born in Mysore, India, and died in the United States, where he was a university professor. He was a remarkable linguist and translator too. He writes about living and writing between two cultures. His poems are highly particular and often personal, but what comes through strongly is a sense of relationship of self to one's body and to history, to his traditional Hindu upbringing, and to a modern American environment. His poem Pleasure reads, a naked Jaina monk, ravished by spring, favored the vigor of long celibacy, lusting now as never before for the reek inside by its own saliva, cool Ganges turning sensual on him. This poem is full of sensuous particularity, and Ramanujan's ranges of themes and styles is breathtaking. His images are very lively, and there is in her poetry a sense of rootedness. This often exists in tension with an anxious sense of cultural displacement. Most of the time, Ramanujan's work straddles to two worlds of his India and American experiences. Les Murray, another poet who was born in 1938, is a powerful Australian poet. The power line incantation and an absolutely ordinary rainbow typify his adventurous and commanding poetry. Noonday Axeman epitomizes his role as sage and as a mythologizer of Australian landscape and culture. The best of his poetry is to be found in the Vernacular Republic poems 1961 1981. Other works, The Ilex Tree, The Weatherboard Cathedral, Poems Against Economics, Lunch and Counter Lunch, Ethnic Radio, Daylight Moon, Doxford Field, The Boy Who Stole the Funeral. Murray lacks cosmopolitanism but makes up for that life with his versatility and craving. In conclusion, we can understand that the point of these brief references to these non Canadian English language poets is that there is a lot that Canadian and non Canadian Commonwealth English language poetry have to offer each other. If the poets treated here are more cosmopolitan, the Canadians are better with the long poems. Canadians should not shut themselves off from Anglo American and Commonwealth poetry in English. In the same way, a greater reliance on modernist methods and less of a distress of Yeats, Eliot, and in Lowell as influences is capable of being helpful in the long run. The long poem in the main strength of Canadian poetry as a whole, but shorter poems in a metaphysical strain should also find greater representation in Canadian literary output. In the field of poems by women writers, Canada is quite well placed and has a lot of offer to other English language Commonwealth poets. Poetry by expatriate women also is a strong body of writing in Canada. On the whole, language Canadian poetry compares quite favorably with poetry from other Commonwealth poetries. Voices from the margins are also being accommodated quite well these days. Now, to discuss the important questions, um, let us understand what is the first question. What makes Walcott poetry a little more complex and hybridized than the poetry of the most Canadian poets? Now, this is a very important question we need to understand. Um, Give me a second. So yes, so what makes Derek Walcott's poetry a little more complex and hybridized than the poetry of the most Canadian poets? Now we need to understand that Derek Walcott's poetry is very complex already and hybridized than most of the Canadian poets because of his unique background and thematic preoccupations. Since he was born and raised in St. Lucia, Walcott was deeply influenced by the colonial post-colonial tensions of the Caribbean, which gave his poetry a rich cultural hybridity. His work masterfully blends European literary traditions, particularly British and the classic influences, with the oral storytelling traditions and rhythm of the Caribbean. His fusion results in a complex linguistic texture where he interweaves a formal poetic structure with Creole dialects and long local expressions. His poems often grapple with the themes of colonial history, identify displacement, and the search for belonging, creating a layered and multifaceted poetic voice. Unlike many Canadian poets who primarily engage with themes of nature, identity, and multiculturalism within a more uniform Western literary tradition, Walcott's poetry carries the weight of post colonial struggles and a deep engagement with historical consciousness, making it more intricate and hybridized. Now, when we talk about the next question, that is, how does Heaney show an acute awareness of the political situation in Northern Ireland? Now, Seamus Heaney demonstrated an acute awareness of the political situation in Northern Ireland by weaving themes of history, violence, and identity to his poetry. Writing during the height of the Troubles, the period of sectarian conflict between the Unionist and the Nationalist, Heaney remained sensitive to the complexities of both cultural heritage and contemporary struggles. His poems do not explicitly take sides but instead reflect the deeply personal and historical wounds of the Irish landscape and people. Works such as North and Punishment use myth and historical allegory to comment on contemporary violence, drawing parallels between ancient rituals and modern political killings. His use of long bodies, ancient remains preserved in the peat bogs, becomes a powerful metaphor for the cyclical nature of violence and sacrifice in Orland. Excuse me. His ability to connect the present with the past, particularly through agricultural and earthy imagery, highlights his awareness of the deep-seated divisions and historical grievances that fuel Northern Ireland's political tensions. His poetic voice, though deeply rooted in Irish culture and rural life, maintains a universality that speaks to broader themes of conflict, suffering, and reconciliation. The third question, what is distinctive about the poetic style of A.K. Ramanujan? And A.K. Ramanujan poetic style is distinctive because it's a seamless blend of Indian cultural traditions without modernist sensibilities. His poetry is marked by a deep personal introspection and a nuanced engagement with memory, family, and linguistic hybridity. One of his most remarkable features in his ability to move between the personal and the mythical, often drawing on folklore, classical Indian literature, and everyday domestic life. He writes with a quiet yet powerful emotional intensity, using precise and evocative imagery to bring out the complexity of human relationships, particularly within the familiar context. His poems frequently explore themes of displacement, identity, and linguistic duality as he navigated life between India and the United States. His bilingualism is reflected in his poetic form, as he often incorporates elements from Tamil and Kannada traditions into English, creating a unique and fluid linguistic rhythm. His free verse style is a deceptively simple, with an economy of words that allows for multiple layers of meaning. His use of irony and subtle humor adds depth of his exploration towards cultural paradoxes, making his work stand out within the English poetry. His poem Obituary, for example, is a masterful juxtaposition of loss and mundane details, encapsulating his ability to balance the personal with the profound. Ramanujan's poetry, therefore, is distinguished by its cross cultural sensibility, its introspective depth, and its ability to bridge the old and the new, making him one of the most unique voices in contemporary Indian poetry. So, we just discussed the important questions in Unit 6, and to take you further, to take you a little back, if I am not wrong, yeah, Unit 5, the growth of Canadian poetry. We will discuss about the last questions under Unit 3. The questions are: what are the chief characteristics? What are the chief characteristics of the 20th century Canadian poetry? And there are other questions also, three questions in all. So 20th century Canadian poetry is characterized by a dynamic interplay of tradition and innovation, reflecting the country's evolving national identity, multicultural influences, and engagement with global literary movements. One of its defining features is a deep connection to the Canadian landscape. Excuse me. Excuse me. With poets frequently using nature as both a literal and symbolic element in their work. This period also witnessed an increased focus on modernist experimentation as poets moved away from the rigid formal structures to embrace free verse, fragmentation, and unconventional syntax. The influence of indigenous oral traditions, French and English literary heritage, and the later, the voice of immigrant writers contributed to a richly diverse poetic landscape. Canadian poetry of the 20th century also exhibits a heightened awareness of social and political issues, including nationalism, post colonial identity, and tension between regional and cosmopolitan sensibilities. Many people sought to redefine Canadian literature in relationship to both British and American influences, often asserting a unique voice that balanced personal experience with historical consciousness. Uh, so, the second question is giving a brief account of the major themes of Canadian poetry. And this includes identity, nature, multiculturalism, historical memory. One of the central preoccupations of Canadian poets has been the exploration of national identity, particularly in relationship to colonialism, bilingualism, and cultural diversity. The tension between English and French traditions, as well as the recognition of indigenous narratives, has led to a complex poetic discourse on belonging and heritage. Nature, as both a physical reality and a metaphor for survival, solitude, and transformation, plays a vital role in Canadian poetry. The vastness and the harshness of Canadian landscape have inspired reflections on isolation, endurance, and human connections to the land. Another significant theme is the experience of immigration and multiculturalism, as poets from diverse backgrounds have infused Canadian poetry with the new perspective of displacement, hybridity, and cultural fusion. Historical memory and the passage of time are also crucial elements, as poets frequently engage with Canada's colonial past, Indigenous histories, and the impact of global events on Canadian society. These themes often intersect, creating a layered and an introspective poetic tradition that continues to evolve. Coming to explain the last question, writing a short note on Canadian nature poetry. Nature poetry in Canada, in Canadian poetry, nature in Canadian poetry holds a special place in the country's literary canon, reflecting both the grandeur and the challenges of the natural world. Since Canada is a vast land of wilderness, dense forest, and rugged landscapes, poets have often turned to nature as a source of inspiration, identity, and existential reflection. Early Canadian poets such as Charles G.D. Roberts and Bliss Carman were instrumental in establishing nature poetry as a vital genre, drawing on romantic traditions to celebrate the beauty and power of the environment. Their work often depicted the wilderness as a space of spiritual renewal and national pride. However, later poets introduced more complex and sometimes darker perspectives on nature, portraying it as indifferent, threatening, or deeply intertwined with the human history. Poets like Al Prudy and Margaret Atwood, for instance, used nature not only as a backdrop but also as a lens through which to explore themes of survival, environmental destruction, and the fragile relationship between humans and their surroundings. Indigenous poets such as Rita Jo and Louis Half have brought an additional depth to Canadian nature poetry by integrating traditional ecological knowledge and indigenous worldviews that emphasize respect for the land. Through evocative imagery and a profound um, awareness of Canada's natural heritage, Canadian nature poetry continues to evolve, reflecting both the country's environmental consciousness and its shifting cultural landscape. Now, if we are to conclude both the units, if we are to conclude both the units having all the six questions, um, we come to know that in conclusion, the 20th century Canadian poetry is marked by a fusion of tradition and modernist experimentation, reflecting the country's evolving cultural identity and literary diversity. With its deep engagement with themes of national identity, multiculturalism, historical consciousness, and the natural world, Canadian poetry has developed a distinctive voice that resonates both locally and globally. The exploration of nature, in particular, remains a defining characteristics, with poets using the landscape as a powerful symbol of endurance, isolation, and transformation. So, um, as Canadian poetry continues to evolve, it remains a vibrant, multifaceted expression of the country's rich history, cultural complexity, artistic innovation. So, whether it is Walcott, who often merges classical references with local Caribbean imagery, or whether Heaney, who critiques the cyclical nature of conflict in Ireland, or whether it is A.K. Ramanujam, whose irony and subtle humor play a key role in his work, we come to understand that Canadian poetry is rich with complexity, undoubtedly, themes of nature and national consciousness. So, as Canadian poetry, it remains really a defining element and offers both the aesthetic appreciation of the wilderness and critical reflection on environment and cultural concerns. So, we have completed Unit 5 and Unit 6 today. So we will still continue with block two, and tomorrow we discuss at 3:45 again on the two major novelists as poets. In unit 7 and in unit 8 we discuss about the five other important poets. So with this we come to an end of today's session. Thank you so much. Have a good evening.